Hello, my name is Eric, and today we're going to deploy a Rust function to AWS Lambda via Cargo Lambda. So Cargo Lambda is a way to run, build, and deploy Rust functions on AWS Lambda in a very efficient manner. You don't feel like you have to do a lot of like jumping through hoops just to be able to achieve it. And all right, let's just jump into it. So, a few things. So, one thing I want to preface off the bat, I'm actually doing this on AWS Cloud 9. And so you can also do it locally. It doesn't matter where you do it. But there are a few things you have to be careful about in AWS Cloud 9, just things to keep in mind that I'll get into in a second. But first, let's start with Cargo Lambda. So first you have to install Rust, and then you have to install Cargo Lambda with these commands right here. It looks straightforward, but not quite, at least on the AWS. But it's still very simple. So the first thing is as soon as your environment loads up, um, use sudo password Ubuntu. You're going to set up a password because later on you're going to install brew, and then brew you run these commands that the brew documentation gives you to add it to your path variable. Then you make sure, just like I'm highlighting here, you install Rust. And then once you install Rust, then you can install Cargo Lambda as the documentation suggests. So the password thing actually caught me, and it was a pretty tricky thing. So once you've installed it, you can make a new project, which is exactly what we're going to do. And we're going to say Cargo Lambda new. Let's call it letter counter in my case. I'm going to say no in this case. I'm not going to make it into a HTTP function. I hit enter. But it does provide that. So the template code that comes out of that changes depending if you say yes or no to that HTTP question. And we're going to jump into that directory. Cool. So you can actually, there's a cool command that comes right after in the getting started, which is super helpful and very straightforward, this documentation. Cargo Lambda watch. Cargo Lambda watch emulates sort of the Lambda and the Lambda functionality, I should say, and just allows you to test your Rust function. And in this case, before I do that, I already have logic that I already want to use for this specific project. But you can also use the default logic that comes in with this with the template. You can use it as is without any issue whatsoever, and just follow along with the documentation so that you can see everything play out. But in this case, I'm using a very specific logic. All I'm doing is taking in an input string and providing a count of the characters in those for each of those letters. That's it. So now that I have my logic in there, now we can follow along. So you don't necessarily have to do the code that I did, but you could just follow along and keep following the documentation without issue because it's very straightforward. So in this terminal session, I'm going to serve up the Lambda function, and I'm going to start opening a new terminal. This takes a while to run and finish, but actually I want to take a moment to clarify a few things while that runs. So in AWS Cloud 9, as I showed, you can make an instance. You can also highlight that instance and change the IAM roles to add certain permissions to the to this specific Cloud9 environment, and that includes stuff like working with Lambda functions and API gateways and the like. Another way that people also, or that you can also connect your profile is go to the AWS Explorer, and in this key button, you can also add your credentials as a new connection, and then you just add your IM user. The way that I actually found easiest was to do these export commands that I found in one of the Rust guides, and basically it just saves that to that specific terminal session, and you add your access key, your secret access key, and you add your region. And it's a pretty straightforward process. And other than that, oh, and one more bonus thing is, so because you're working in AWS, if you go for one of the smaller instances, because you probably don't need to spend a lot of money, you'll want to get the resizing script, which is a bash script that AWS provides. It's called moving an environment and resizing or encrypting Amazon EBS volumes. You essentially copy this script, you make it, and then you just say bash resize doc sh 20. 20 is for 20 gigabytes. You can make it bigger if you want. So I already did that already, so I'm not going to do it again. All right, so let's now that in this terminal, we served up the Lambda function. So here I am going to go straight into that, and let's see. Let's jump into invoking it. So in my specific case, it's a JSON file. Yeah, that makes sense. I have to go a few steps back. There you go. So it parsed my input string. Actually, I want to clarify right now. My inputs have to look like this. Input string, hello world. Always has to say input string, and it can be, and then the text after that can be anything. So it parsed out hello world, and as you can see, L was the most frequent letter. 2 L's in hello and 1 L in world. Awesome. So let's go back to the next step in the documentation. So after you've tested invoking the function locally, now we start getting into building it and preparing it for deployment. So let's do exactly that. I'm going to once again, I'm going to leave that terminal session alone, and then I'm going to navigate to my letter counter folder, and I'm going to Cargo Lambda build release. While that's running, I actually also want to take an opportunity again to explain a little bit more about the credential process. So one of the reasons I actually opted for this way at the end was because AWS Cloud 9 environments have issues with temporarily managed credentials, and those were impeding me from being able to deploy the Lambda function, the Rust function to Lambda because of that status of a temporary credential. So I actually opted for this approach where I just save that in the terminal session temporarily, and I was able to deploy it without any issues whatsoever. Another thing that I want to highlight is that your users make sure that your user's region, the credentials that you use, whether it says global or has a specific region name, matches the region name for this environment. For this environment. Yeah, because when you deploy the Lambda, you can actually deploy it to any of the regions. It doesn't matter at all. And other than that, we're all set. All right. Now that we're done building that, let's get to deploying it. Just like I said before, it's going to reject me because I don't have the credentials set up. See? Temporary managed credentials. So I'm going to pause the video and run those commands with my own private keys. All right, now for the region, and that's it. And I should be able to hit Cargo Lambda deploy without really any issues. Perfect. Let's get rid of this right here. So right now is being deployed, and we're going to actually get access to our function very, very soon. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to there are two ways to reach this. So sometimes you can find it pretty quickly in the Explorer. So I deployed it to US dash west dash 2. I think another way you can find it here is, yeah, you just click this tab and you can see. Yeah, so sometimes you can find it here. Oh, cool. Look at it here, letter counter. Let's see, invoke on AWS. So this is actually being invoked remotely. We can test that in two ways, actually. Let's do exactly that. So the documentation, we'll get into it as well, but you can call it remotely, and you're basically calling what you just deployed. So in this case, let me go back a little. Yep. Not too much of a concern in my case, since I already know that I can call it here. So I said that the format had to be like this. And let's just change it up a little. Add a few L's, a few O's. So here I'm able to put in the example input since this is the way it has to be, input string, and then the string. And let's invoke it. There you go. This is the result. I also went back and checked this out. So basically, the only mistake that I made was that I didn't call in this after the dash dash remote, you have to put the name of the function that you uploaded. And now when I run it, it works. So yeah, I just had the name wrong. I had it as Rust project. And we are almost done. Or rather, we've already achieved what we wanted to do. This is just another way to look at what you've done. So once you make your function, you can go find it in AWS Lambda. You can actually go inside and let me borrow my template from before and create a test for it. You can say my test. Your function is here. See how it has the name letter counter? And then because I have a very specific format, format the JSON, template. Yeah, that's the one. And save and test. And then when you open the log, you can see that the letter count has been generated. Thank you for staying with me thus far, and thanks for watching the whole video. Bye-bye.